My name is Paula Red. I'm the director of the UNECE Division of Forest, Land and Housing. It's a division that, amongst other services, provides service into the intergovernmental work to promote affordable, climate-neutral housing, resilient cities, and transparent land use practices in alignment with the key UN policy documents and international commitments. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this webinar, which is focusing on principles for green financing for sustainable real estate, infrastructure, and urban transformation projects. Let me just remind you that these principles were endorsed last year by the UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management in October, and they were prepared by the Committee Bureau in cooperation with international experts and the Real Estate Market Advisory Group of the Committee. The principles are intended to provide guidance to national, regional, local governments and to other stakeholders as interested on green financing of real estate and urban infrastructure projects. And they have the aim to foster an inclusive and integrated market ecosystem to drive multi-sectoral synergies for sustainable urban development at all levels. For the United Nations, green financing plays an important role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The principles are also aligned with and support the goals of several other key UN policy documents and international commitments. Just to give you some examples, the Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing, the European Green Deal, or the Bank of International Settlements Basel III Agreement. For city governments, the principles for green financing offer practical recommendations on development investment grade projects in alignment with the UNECE guidelines on tools and mechanisms to finance smart, sustainable cities projects developed as part of the United for Smart Sustainable Cities initiative. So this event today is organized jointly by UNECE Committee and its Working Party on Land Administration, and explores how the principles facilitate green financing in real estate and infrastructure. It will provide you the opportunity to engage in discussions shaping the future of our cities toward a greener and more sustainable urban future. Before I give the floor to our chair, Madam Stephanie Führer, the chair of the UNECE Committee on Housing and Land Management, let me also introduce the two gentlemen there next to me, who will be moderating the next sessions of this workshop. So session 1 on goals and characteristics of the principles will be moderated by Mr. Giampiero Bambagioni. Many of you know him as the vice chair of the UNECE Committee on Housing, on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management. And to my right, the moderator of session 2, Sustainable Ecosystems Approach, is Mr. Luca Bertalò, Secretary General of the European Mortgage Federation, European Covered Bond Council, ECBC. So welcome and thank you for this. So before we start with the sessions, Stephanie will be very grateful also for your words of welcome. Over to you. And actually, sorry, before we give it to Stephanie, just a reminder, technical reminder, to keep your microphone closed, otherwise we will hear your voice. When we open for question and answers at the end of the presentations, then you will be able to raise your hands or write in the chat, and we will make sure to address your questions. Sorry, over to you now, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Paula. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and participants. I am honored to welcome you to today's hybrid webinar on the principles for green financing for sustainable real estate infrastructure and urban transformation projects. These principles want to contribute to our collective efforts to promote environmentally sustainable and financially resilient urban projects. Why is this important? The world is facing unprecedented challenges in the realm of urban development, housing, and land management that need to be addressed decisively and with the right level of urgency. In the domains of urban development, housing, and land management, the decisions made today influence the lives of a multitude of people for many years, in some cases even centuries to come. Rapid urbanization, climate change, and resource scarcity are putting immense pressure on our cities and infrastructure. and the pressure will only grow in the future. It is imperative that we transition towards more sustainable and resilient urban solutions to ensure the well-being of current and future generations. We at the Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management believe that the principles for green financing for sustainable real estate, infrastructure and urban transformation projects can help with that transition. In order to convey to you why we think that, I want to quickly highlight the importance of green financing. Green financing plays a pivotal role in driving the transition towards sustainable urban development. If financing becomes greener, more environment-friendly projects will be realized, while less not-so-green projects will see the light of day. By channeling financial resources towards environmentally friendly projects, we can mitigate climate risks, reduce carbon emissions, and enhance the resilience of our cities. This also presents an opportunity to align financial investments with global sustainability goals, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. Let me now take a couple of minutes to introduce the principles for green financing, which will be the subject of this afternoon's discussions. The principles for green financing for sustainable real estate, infrastructure, and urban transformation projects provide a comprehensive framework for promoting green financing initiatives. These principles, developed in collaboration with international experts, aim to guide governments, stakeholders, and financial institutions in integrating environmental considerations into their investment decisions. They emphasize the importance of active engagement, climate neutrality, social inclusion, innovation, regulatory support, and long-term stability in green financing initiatives. Throughout today's webinar, we will delve into the goals and characteristics of these principles. We will examine case studies of sustainable ecosystem approaches and discuss the implementation challenges and the opportunities with the renowned experts present here today. We are privileged to have esteemed speakers from various sectors, including banking, government, and the private sector, who will share their insights and experiences in green financing. I encourage all participants to actively engage in the discussions, share their perspectives, and explore potential collaborations to drive positive change in our urban landscapes. Now, let me give the word to the moderator of the first session, during which the goals and characteristics of the principles will be discussed. Its moderator, Giampiero Bambaccioni, is, as Paola already said, Vice Chair of the UNECE's Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management, and the driving force behind the establishment of the principles for green financing. Thank you again for that, Giampiero. And now I think the first session can start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you all. It is a pleasure and honor to present the green financing principles and at the same time to be the moderator of this panel, the first panel. Before highlighting the purpose and characteristics of the principles, let me introduce the speakers briefly for the moment. Valeria Cipollone, Department of the Treasury in the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Italy. Ali Erbilgic, European Banking Authority. Fabio Massimo Natalucci, Deputy Director of the Monetary and Capital Markets Department at the International Monetary Funds. As mentioned, the principles has been endorsed by delegates from the 56 countries of the UNECE region during the committee session last October. Let me thank those who contributed to the drafting of the principles, experts from a dozen organizations from different countries, and in particular the UNECE Secretariat for the support given to the project. Thanks, Paola. Thanks, you all. The principles have the purpose of promoting at the same time sustainable
Here.
I think we're muted. No,
No,
You muted.
it was mute for some reason. I don't know.
Yes.
Sorry.
So just, I think it's better if you start from,
Last slide.
last few seconds. Sorry.
I don't know what's happening.
no problem.
Yeah.
Principles are aimed at supporting investments in green projects by governments, public agencies, cities and local authorities, and at promoting access to public and private capital markets in public-private partnerships with developers, institutional investors, and asset managers. Next one. Sometimes the public sector with different levels of complexities, also in consideration of the different levels of development that characterize the economies of the 56 countries of the region, has difficulty in finding the financial resources necessary to transform programs and projects into operational plans. The difficulties involve the possibility of accessing international capital markets in compliance with the current regulatory framework and with the aim of contributing to sustainable development, the possibility of promoting innovation and long-term sustainability using the levers of green loans, green bonds, green mortgages, green projects, and so on. Next one, please. According to a United Nations definition, next one. Okay. Green financing refers to environment-oriented financial products or services, such as mortgages, loans, insurances, or bonds, which recognize the value of the environment and this natural capital and seeks to improve human well-being and social equity while reducing environmental risks and improving ecological integrity. Next one. So, green finance includes, but is not limited to, environmental aspects, pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, water, air quality issues. Let me remember that housing and the buildings emit around 40% of greenhouse gases and use over 37% of energy resources. B, climate change related aspects as energy efficiency, renewable energy, prevention and mitigation of climate change connected to severe events. For environmental and climate change consideration, risk can be classified as follows. Physical risk, deriving from direct damage to property or trade disruption, liability risk, addressing who will be held responsible for the impact that will occur in the future and what this impact will be. And then in the case of climate change, also transition risk, financial risk, arising from the missing transition to a low carbon economy. Next one, please. For the United Nations, green financing plays an important role in achieving the sustainable development goals. Next one, sorry, please. Infrastructure and urban transformation projects, both for the new construction as well as regeneration, renovation, and refurbishment for the purpose of energy efficiency and resilience, should aim, on the one hand, at being economically feasible and financially sustainable, and on the other hand, at pursuing a green, sustainable architecture, urban design, and planning. Next, please. The principles aim aimed at creating the conditions for the bankability of projects are based on the United Nations SDGs and other international commitments. I call the advance the Geneva United Nations Charter on Sustainable Housing, United Nations Policy Framework for Real Estate Markets, the EU Sustainable Finance Package, and the Basel III Agreement, and so on. But next, please. But what are the 7 principles and what are the goals? Today, I will recall just some of the goals associated with each principle. In any case, the complete document has been published on the UNECE website. First, active engagement of capital providers. Public and private capital providers shall actively engage in planning infrastructure and its construction in cooperation with governments, urban planners, developers, construction companies, other relevant stakeholders, and the local communities. Next, please. Second, climate neutrality and the resilience of green urban solutions. Public and private capital providers shall be encouraged to give priority to real estate and urban transformation projects involving the construction or the renewal of buildings and infrastructure aimed at reaching the following priorities: reduce climate footprint, resilience to natural disaster, use of renewable energy, affordability and accessibility for all. Policymakers and financial operators are invited to promote initiatives and/or partnership for the use of public or private capital to finance the economy's resilience to climate change in view of the transition risk, climate change mitigation, and the physical risk, climate change adaptation. Third, social dimension and affordability of green urban solutions. The development of the social dimension of ESG through principal adverse indicators and the social taxonomies are key for the comprehensive assessment of investments and promoting green investments, while also supporting the affordability of housing and urban infrastructure for all. Next one, sorry. Okay, thank you. Fourth, innovative green financial tools. Governments and financial entities shall promote the development and the introduction of innovative tools enabling all actors, including inhabitants, in the economic system to contribute with the resources and their disposal to the green development of urban areas. Next, please. Fifth, improved regulatory framework to support green financing. National and supranational authorities shall develop regulation which establish a transparent and competitive framework for the engagement of private capital providers in financing of urban green projects. Next, please. Sixth, long-term stability of green real estate and infrastructure financing. In order to promote the reduction of environmental impact and energy consumption, as well as greater resilience of buildings to natural disasters, the design of new buildings and the regeneration of existing building stock should consider the life cycle of each building and the infrastructure with a view to long-term performance. Next, please. Seventh, sustainable ecosystem approach. To provide a long-term support to urban transformation projects, support shall be provided to the establishment of an inclusive and integrated market ecosystem of actors. Such ecosystem will foster multi and cross-sectoral synergies and activate the market. Next, please. But how to transform a project into concrete realizations? It is necessary to plan sustainable initiative with an holistic approach, including the financial one in compliance with the principles for green financing and with the evaluation of risk associated to ESG, to ESG factors. In conclusion, next. Thank you. The principles non-binding may be implemented at regional or national level as soft law or with a specific regulatory initiative. For example, for countries in transition, also taking into consideration the level of economic development. Second, we believe that the instrument of green financing will contribute to promoting innovation and long-term sustainability from an impact investing perspective. Therefore, investment connected to social or environmental goals with measurable and additional impact compared to traditional investment. Next one. Thank you. Thank you. So let me invite the speakers to address their presentation now. The first presentation I asked is Mr. Fabio Massimo Natalucci, international Fabio Massimo Natalucci serves as Deputy Director of the Monetary and Capital Markets Department, overseeing global financial markets monitoring and the systemic risk assessment functions. He leads the production of the Global Financial Stability Report, assessing global financial stability risks. Fabio also monitors and evaluates risk and opportunities in sustainable finance markets. Previously, he held senior roles at the Federal Reserve Board and the U.S. Department of Treasury, focusing on monetary policy, financial regulatory policy, and international financial stability. Fabio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank you for inviting me. So it's a pleasure to be here. I put together a presentation. What I thought I would do, we have produced jointly with OECD, the World Bank, and the BIS, a product a while ago, trying to think about how to think about alignment, in particular applying the G20 principle for sustainable finance, focusing on climate change mitigation, with an eye of scaling up private climate finance. So I thought walking you briefly through some of these principles, see how they could map and compare with the principle that you have just described. I think could provide some context in terms of the discussion. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to give you a sense of like, why do we need a climate information architecture? What I mean by climate information architecture, it's data, disclosure, as well as taxonomy/classification. Then I'm going to try to give you a sense of what are the main messages out of this report that was produced recently, and then how to map, if you want, to compare those principles with the principle that you have just described in the presentation. So next slide. So let me start, like, what is the role of the climate information architecture? You can think of the climate information architecture of three legs, like three tiers. One, we need high quality, reliable, comparable, consistent data. Data for me are the stepping stone, are the building block of any kind of work we want to do in terms of stepping up and scaling up private finance, right? Whether this is greenhouse gas emission or whether this is target, data are a critical role. That is, again, the building block of the work that is being done for climate finance. The second leg is a set of disclosure requirements, a standard that harmonize and create some sort of like global standard in some sense. These are embedded into law, into regulations, supported by standards at the international level and metrics that are being used. I'm just going to point to the ISSB global standard in terms of sustainability and climate as an example of global standard on top of which different countries can build based on their specificities. And then there is a leg of the climate information architecture, which has to do with taxonomies plan. In particular, I mean transition taxonomy, which is particularly relevant for emerging markets. A lot of these assets in emerging markets are neither green nor brown, are in the middle. So how to transition, how to set the incentive for a transition over time toward green, keeping in mind and being cognizant of the different development stages of this country. So obviously each pillar here is intrinsically linked to each other. So you need, for example, robust data to design transition plan. Those are the basis then for this. What are the objective of this transition, of this information architecture? One, I would say it's an important prerequisite to actually price risk, right? So price climate risk. Well, this is true both for investors, so when we think about scaling up climate finance market, but also for regulators to be able to price what are the risks. So at the firm level, what's the risk and opportunities are important, obviously, as a prerequisite for financial support for the transition. And lastly, in terms of monitoring financial stability. So this is something that we have done here. We have produced a number of chapters in the Global Financial Stability Report. And again, the building block of that work has been putting together data in a way that allows us to price climate risk and opportunities. So next slide, please. Now, how that translates into policies, I'm just going to quote here for the October 2023 Global Financial Stability Report, where there was a chapter on unlocking private climate finance in emerging markets. And the message was that we need a broad policy mix of financial policies, as well as strengthening the climate information architecture. For example, regulators in emerging markets and development economies should consider developing transition economies, valuable alignment tool for mobilizing the financing of low carbon activity. They should devise sectoral transition plans, develop an investment pipeline of projects, and supporting the achievement of these objectives. Right. So this climate information architecture has been at the core in terms of our messaging, as well as broad policy mix coupled with climate policies. Next slide, please. Now, why are transition taxonomies a useful alignment tools? Transition taxonomies are useful to identify types of activities, technologies, and industrial processes that have the potential for a substantial reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So essentially a common understanding of investment conducive to Paris alignment transition. So they help identifying activities that better align incentive and significantly reduce greenhouse gas emission over time, including in the most intensive carbon sectors. So what we show here to the right is what transition taxonomy are often built on what we call a traffic light approach. So they encompass not only targets for these economic activities that are already low carbon, that's the green circle, but also provide criteria and financing priorities for economies activity that can decarbonize, that's the orange, as well as they need to be phased out over time, that's in red. So what are these transition taxonomy? They are, first of all, a classification system. So because they contribute to understanding under which condition economic activity can be considered as sustainable. Second are a measuring tool. So they help measuring how good a company is progressing toward climate goals based on quantitative criteria. Third, a transition tool that sets goals in a direction for travel for companies. For example, transition plans based on common decarbonization pathways allow companies to communicate concrete climate objective target, actions, and accountability mechanisms. Next slide, please. Now, these taxonomies have a variety of range of uses. I just mentioned a few here to the left in terms of standards and labels for financial instruments, in terms of corporate disclosure for climate-related information and alignment, transition planning framework, such as CAPEX plan aligned with taxonomy, financial supervisory data, prudential disclosure. So essentially, they are key issue to ensure that they are usable by company and the private sector. They underpin standards, label and disclosure requirements. Some jurisdictions are also contemplating a wide range of use cases. So policies, risk weights, spending frameworks, and obviously they largely depend on the usability and reliability of this alignment approach. Next slide. So that's in some sense some background work for the report. And now what are the main messages of this activating alignment report? I'm just going to keep a couple of examples here. So if you move to the next slides, among these alignment approaches, taxonomy have been developing all around the world for the past few years, China and European Union leading the way. If you look just at public taxonomy, there are now 40 public taxonomies, either adopted or under development, including the European Union taxonomy, the ASEAN taxonomy, and common framework for taxonomy in Latin America and the Caribbean. Most of these taxonomies are developed or being developed in emerging markets and developing economies across all 5 continents, as you can see from the chart. Now, while the development of this taxonomy is good news for the climate information architecture, there are still significant variation across them. In particular, there are some differences that can happen on the ground. I'm just going to offer a few examples. One, in terms of objective and characteristics of the design. So do they focus on climate goals or do they have a wider perspective? What methodology do they adopt to set climate targets across different sectors? How do different sectors prioritize? Do they include fossil fuel? How are transition embedded here? The another issue is the role. So do they come with disclosure requirements or not? Are they used, for example, for debt issuance? Are the data being verified? So one issue here is the lack or potential lack of comparability and interoperability across regions and countries. That would not only fragment financial markets, but also would exacerbate data inconsistency, leading to fragmentation and higher transaction costs, which is exactly the opposite objective we're trying to achieve, thinking of scaling up climate finance. So it may also impair efforts to accurately assess whether financing contributes or undermines the goal of the Paris Agreement, so contributing to missing the climate objective. Next slide. Now, the question is, so why are we involved with this work? When I mean we, I mean the IMF, the World Bank and the OECD. This report that was published in September of last year. I think the idea is that based on these highest principles that were published by the G20 in 2021, the report provides essentially core design and disclosure elements that could provide a minimum baselines for comparability for climate data, embedding the specificity and need of emerging markets and developing economies. I want to stress the last point, this embedding the specificity and need, right? Different countries are at different stages of development, are in different transition along the transition path, are in different places and face different challenges. These principles are labeled here to the left, so I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see they include ensuring material positive contribution to sustainability, avoid negative contribution on other sustainability goals. They have to be dynamic and in adjustment reflecting changes in policy, importantly technology, but also the state of the transition. They need to reflect good governance and transparency, be science-based, and address transition consideration. So those are the G20 high-level principles, and those are the principles on which we base some of the work in this alignment project. If you can move to the next slides. I'm just going to offer a couple of examples. For each principle, after identifying operational challenges and developing suggestions to improve integration and comparability between alignment approaches, the report provides guidance to support design, implementation, and disclosure. In particular, provide guidance on how to design an alignment methodology with climate change mitigation as the primary objective. So ensure material real-world decarbonization outcomes. Designing an alignment approach according to this principle raises a variety of methodological challenges, including formalizing the scope of the objective, setting climate targets, and defining screening criteria, as well as prioritization of sector. Now, provide also guidance on how to ensure that alignment methodologies focus on climate change mitigation would not harm other environmental or social objectives. So alignment approaches needs to be underpinned by a foundation of risk management to avoid negative contribution to other sustainability objectives and goals. A robust ESG due diligence and risk management approaches contribute to financial stability by reducing investment risk, preventing greenwashing, and preventing unintended secondary impact on society and the environment. As you can see here in the chart to the right, this is just an example of this two-tier approach for implementing principle 2, so a guidance on how to avoid negative contribution. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through the specific steps here, but just an example how this is being this approach is being used and relates to specific G20 principle that I described before. Let me give you another example in terms of providing guidance for principle here. We also provide guidance on the following issues. If you can move to the next slides. The fact that alignment approaches are more effectively if they reflect scientific, technological, and market changes, as well as the evolution of both domestic and international policy agendas and priorities. So the best available science and technology should drive the definition of metrics, threshold, and technological screening and assessment criteria. We also provide guidance on good governance and transparency and assessment criteria in alignment approaches with different stages of these approaches. So we provide guidance, for example, to promote quality, consistency, and reliability on alignment approaches, to a consistent, transparent use of climate data metrics, fostering quality and comparability across jurisdictions and industries, using reliable, comparable, and high-quality data. And then on the content of transition plan for companies to ensure that they address transition consideration in a science-based manner. Next slide, please. So how does this alignment approach contribute to the policy discussion, and how is it going to link to the principle that has been previously described here? I think there are three main contributions. One is trying to facilitate interoperability, so contributing to higher degree of interoperability and incorporating alignment approaches into the transition finance framework. That's the first contribution. The second one is providing guidance to the private sector in terms of reducing the risk of fragmentation of capital markets, as well as providing background on technical methodological aspects behind these alignment approaches. And then third, also applying this principle to our own work at the fund in terms of policy development. So think about what I just described briefly before about the policy message from the GFSR as an example, or capacity development and technical assistance. So next slide, and this will be my last slide. So how these alignment approaches align themselves in terms of the principle for green financing for sustainable real estate financing, infrastructure, and urban transformation project. Okay, so if you look at the slides, what we're trying to do is trying to map some of the, next slide, please. We're trying to map some of the principle from the activating alignment guidance to the right here in terms of the role of climate information architecture, the role of need for interoperability of framework in terms of assessment of sector activities and assets. And I want to note again the different level here. So the sector, activity, and individual asset in terms of their contribution to carbon level transition, the guidance on broader environmental and social dimension and assessing alignment, the importance of data and transparency as core dimensions, and the inclusiveness in the design and implementation of alignment approaches. I think this principle fit very well with the discussion that has been, the principle that's been discussed in the first presentation. So I think we can think of like the broader G20 principle setting some sort of the backstage, and then this particular principle for green financing for sustainable real estate. I think they match very well with what some of the guidance providing implementation of operationalization of the G20 principle. I'll stop here and happy to answer any questions.
Fabio, thank you for your very clear and comprehensive presentation. Any questions at the end of the panel? So now let me introduce Valeria, the speaker, Valeria Cipollone, department is a policy officer at the Department of the Treasury in the Ministry of Economy and Finance. in Italy, where she deals with sustainable finance issues at domestic, European, and international level. In her capacity, she represents Italy in the negotiation of regulation within the EU Council and co-presents Italy in the Member States Experts Group on Sustainable Finance of the European Commission. Valeria, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I saw her connecting. I think she was there. I saw her connecting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having some trouble with the connection. Sorry. So thank you first of all to the UNECE Secretariat for the invitation to this webinar. Is a speaking also on behalf of Mr. Stefano Cappiello, who is the head of the Directorate 5 on regulation of the supervision of the financial system at the Treasury and who could not participate today. In my intervention, I would like to provide you with a quick overview of some of the domestic activities that we are conducting at the Ministry in order to foster green financing and aiming at increasing sustainable investment. I will try now to share the screen, hopefully not having further issues. I hope you can see that.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. So the first initiative I would like to present is our National Sustainable Finance Platform that has been established at the end of 2022 as a response to the increasing commitments and initiatives on climate change and at international level, and also to the raising level of regulation, in particular to reference with the European framework. So to manage these ever more complex issues and the fast evolving agenda, we felt the need to create a dedicated space involving both the public and private sectors. The platform is indeed meant to be a place where to coordinate and exchange best practices, to carry out analysis and in-depth studies, and to maintain an open and regular dialogue with private stakeholders. Currently, it involves, beside our ministry and the Treasury, the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, and starting from this year, the Ministry of Enterprises. It also involves national financial regulators, such as the Commission for Companies and Stock Exchange, the Bank of Italy, the Institute for Insurance Supervision, and the Commission for the Supervision of Pension Funds. For the years 2023 and 24, the platform has identified 3 main priorities where to work on, and for each one has organized a dedicated working group. And these priorities insist on some of the fragilities of the Italian market, which represent an obstacle to sustainable investment. And they refer to the need to improve access and availability of high quality ESG data, also with reference to the real estate properties of firms and households. They also refer to support sustainability reporting, especially for unlisted SMEs, and to close the insurance protection gap for environmental and climate related risks. So, sorry. Okay. In particular, working group number 2 is working to define a solution to integrate information related to energy efficiency of buildings and to connect databases related to the exposure of real estate to physical risk. And this type of information is indeed scattered, let's say, in different databases, which are managed by different authorities, and in particular, regional authorities, the Revenue Agency, and the Italian National Agency for New Technologies. the main challenge to define this solution has been not related to IT, but rather to data privacy issues, also taking into account the elaborated legal framework on privacy matters. Working group number 2 is currently working to support voluntary ESG disclosure of small and medium unlisted firms, and starting from an accurate mapping of reporting of ESG obligation, in particular with reference to the EU framework, and also taking into account the development of the EFRAG. The group has conducted an extensive discussion with private stakeholders, and this activity helped to identify the sustainability information of unlisted SMEs that could be relevant for the analysis of financial intermediaries. Those assessments are indeed instrumental to the definition of innovative green financing tool or to the implementation of the existing ones, such as green mortgages, and also to evaluate the exposure of portfolios. And this mapping exercise has been at the basis then of the definition of a template for the disclosure of unlisted SMEs. And this template has let's say, a twofold ambition. It fosters on the one side the acknowledgement and the awareness of companies on sustainability issues. And also it wants to facilitate the transmission of those information to financial intermediaries with the overall objective of easing access to finance. I believe that it is pretty straightforward to see the connection between what we are doing within the platform and the UN principles that we are discussing today. In particular, the ongoing work of the platform somehow represent an implementation of Principle 4, which aims at stimulating governments to promote the development and introduction of innovative financial tools, especially through the cooperation with the private sector. And it also implements Principle 5, as our work aims at creating a transparent and competitive framework for the engagement of private capital providers, even if our focus is let's say, broader and not specifically targeting urban or infrastructure projects. So maintaining this focus on the establishment of a competitive framework, I would also like to cite two other initiatives that we are conducting at the Treasury in order to give you a more comprehensive overview. And these initiatives are both realized with the support of the DG reform of the European Commission into different frameworks. The first one is the Sustainable Finance and Investment for the Transition to a Green Economy project, which has been realized between 2020 and 2021 within the Structural Reform Support Program. This initiative aimed at improving the domestic policy framework to support private finance and green investment. And through this initiative, we have defined the framework for sovereign green bond issuance. And indeed, we had the first issuance a couple of years ago. We also worked intensely to identify barriers to private investment and to define potential solutions. And this solution formed the core of an action plan that contained several recommendations with a list of actors and action to be taken in order to solve the existing issues that obstacle sustainable private investment and overall to improve the framework. Actually, the identification of those fragilities has been at the basis of the priorities that have been identified for the work of the platform. And also, we aim at tackling some specific issues with a second initiative that we started at the end of last year within the technical support instrument framework. The project is named Improving ESG Data Availability and Sustainability Corporate Reporting in Italy. It aims indeed at supporting the collection and the greater availability of high quality ESG data and to enhance the reporting of SMEs. Among the main deliverables, there is the definition of a national ESG data hub that should be accessible and usable by business and financial institutions of all sizes. And there is also the definition of a template for the voluntary disclosure of unlisted SMEs. And this deliverable will be completed in synergy with the work of the working group number 3 that I mentioned before. The project will also support us in directly catering the knowledge and the capacity needs to tackle ESG challenges with particular focus of SMEs, and it will be all the activities will be completed by next year. And I would like also to underline that both these initiatives are being conducted with a great engagement with private stakeholder. And this leads me to my conclusion. Let me remark that beneath our work, there is a strong convincement that to advance in sustainable investment, we need an effective cooperation and to create synergies among public and private actors. We will continue to work along those lines to ensure that the improved policy framework we are designing will deliver the expected result. On these final slides, I reported to the link to our website where we regularly publish the updates of our work, and I am ready to answer all of the questions in the follow-up, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria, for your presentation and to focus the activities, the relevant activities at the national level. So after a global overview, a focus at the national level, we have the opportunity to involve a representative from the European Banking Authority. Let me introduce, let me invite, last but not least, Ali Erbilgic. He's a senior policy expert at the European Banking Authority, specializing in ESG risks and regulation within the Department of Economic and Risk Analysis. He also a member of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance. Ali, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giampiero, and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share my slides. Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. You can see my slides, right?
No,
you cannot. Okay. Right. Then perhaps
I can see your slides.
you can see
online we can see them, I think.
Right.
Online they can.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe I'll try in a different way. I'm just gonna share my screen, and then perhaps can you see now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I presented a different way. All right. Okay. So, well, once again, thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of the EBA's work on ESG risk and sustainable finance. So, as you know, as it was mentioned earlier, in the context of the EU Green Deal, the EU has made several ambitious commitments, including to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% compared to 1990 levels by 2030. And the European Banking Authority, as the banking regulator in the European Union, plays an important role to achieve these objectives. So for this reason, sustainable finance has become also a priority on the EBA's regulatory agenda. And today I'm going to give you an overview of this regulatory agenda. And as you will see, these policy aspects are also very relevant in the discussion on the UNECE's principles for green financing, which is the topic of the day. Back in 2022, the EBA published its roadmap on sustainable finance. And this roadmap explains the EBA's approach over the next years to integrate ESG risk considerations in the banking framework. and at the same time to support the EU's wider efforts to achieve the transition to a more sustainable economy. Now, the primary objective is to mitigate ESG risks in banking activities and support an orderly transition through a holistic and a sequenced approach. So, and while doing so, it is crucial for us to follow three key elements. First of all, ensuring proportionality, contributing to the resilience of the EU banking sector. So we always emphasize that this banking regulation, banking framework should be risk-based, and eventually also the convergence at the EU and international level. So that's why, for that reason, the EBA is very closely working together with the various actors, both at the EU level, European Commission, EU Platform on Sustainable Finance, EFRAG, but at the same time, internationally as well. We are at the Basel table, and we are also a member of the NGFS and so on. Now, EBA's work on sustainable finance is cross-cutting. So we cover different areas of the banking regulation. So the picture on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that it shows these different policy areas. And I will briefly go through each of these points. And on the next slide, I will deep dive into some selected areas. So to start with, number one, transparency and disclosure. So the objective is to really facilitate access to information and to data, and also promoting market discipline. So for that reason, in this category, the EBA has initiatives both in banks' Pillar 3 disclosures that I'm going to deep dive into on the next slide. Pillar 3 disclosures on ESG risks, but also on wider sustainability disclosures of banks, such as the requirements under the EU taxonomy regulation. Now, on the second, risk management and supervision, we've been developing products to ensure that banks integrate ESG factors and ESG risks in their risk management framework. But at the same time, the supervisors effectively oversee banks' activities in the area of ESG risk management. When it comes to number three, prudential treatment of exposures, we are working on, in this policy area, to identify the extent to which the ESG risks can be captured already in the existing framework, is the existing framework for capital requirements. And to what extent, and to understand to what extent these factors, these risks, they are already accounted or can be accounted for in capital calculations. Then we have the stress testing. At the moment, we are working on one of system-wide Fit for 55 climate scenario analysis at the EU level. And also we are developing guidelines on banks' own stress testing, not the supervisory stress testing, but banks' own stress testing. And later on, we will move on to supervisory stress testing. And number five, which is not a risk-based policy, it is standards and labels. We are also supporting EU's wider efforts in the area of sustainable finance by supporting definition and methodologies for sustainable banking products. And a couple of years ago, we published our report on green securitization, and we also published our advice to the European Commission and our report recently on green loans and green mortgages, that I will zoom into that in one of my next slides. Then greenwashing, we are also working on greenwashing, a report where we propose a definition for greenwashing and identify features of greenwashing in the banking sector. Supervisory reporting, which is a crucial tool for the supervisors to capture the risk profile of banks. And we are in the process of integrating ESG aspects in supervisory reporting. Again, I will highlight that in our work, ESG risks are not a separate risk categories, but they are treated as the drivers of existing risk categories, such as credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. And finally, number 8, we are in the process of developing a tool to monitor ESG risks and sustainable finance in the EU banking sector. And most of these initiatives and actions are based on the mandates that we receive from the co-legislators, EU co-legislators, but at the same time, specific targeted requests from the European Commission. So in the next slides, I will briefly deep dive into, as I said earlier, some of these aspects. Namely, I will focus on number 1, number 2, and number 3 of this picture, as well as at the end, number 5. So, banks Pillar 3 disclosures. So, the EBA developed Pillar 3 requirements for banks back in 2022, and they've been adopted. And since the beginning of 2023, the large listed European banks have been disclosing semi-annually information on the ESG risks on their books. What is the ultimate objective? The objective is to enhance transparency on ESG risks that banks may be subject to through a set of qualitative and quantitative information. So what are these requirements in the Pillar 3? What are banks are expected to disclose in their Pillar 3 requirements when it comes to ESG risks? First of all, I mean, this slide gives you a snapshot of these requirements. First of all, climate transition risk. We ask banks to disclose information on their exposures to high carbon sectors based on level 2 UNECE codes. The objective is to capture the transition risks in banks' exposures, and also the finance emissions attached to these exposures. That is the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions of the counterparties of banks. And we also ask information about the energy efficiency of the residential and commercial real estate that are being financed by these exposures. Now, similarly for climate physical risk, we are asking about banks' exposures. We ask banks to disclose information of their exposures that may be subject to physical risk. That includes the location of the assets, activities, and the collateral, if relevant for that particular exposure. On the other side of the coin, we also ask banks to disclose information on the mitigating actions. For example, the green asset ratio that is aligned with the Article 8 taxonomy disclosures at the EU level under the CSRD. Also, we call the banking book alignment, the taxonomy alignment ratio, to complement the green asset ratio, because as you know, the treatment of the SMEs in the green asset ratio is only at the denominator, is not in the numerator. So we complete this picture with this complementary ratio, but also, but also we are trying to capture banks' other efforts that are not necessarily taxonomy aligned, but still contribute to the environmental objectives. So information on those as well. But these are mostly for quantitative information, but also we capture some qualitative information. We ask banks to disclose information on their qualitative information on their strategies, business model, governance arrangements, and the risk management framework related to ESG risks. So when I move to Pillar 2 of the Basel framework, that is the ESG risk management and supervision, again, the objective here is to ensure sound management of ESG risks by the institution and also progressive integration of these aspects in supervisory practices. Again, in June 2021, EBA first published a report where we defined key terminology. For example, what is an ESG factor? What is an ESG risk? What are the transmission channels? We also discussed indicators, metrics, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, metrics and methods for banks to evaluate these ESG risks. And we came up with some recommendations, both for banks in terms of ESG risk management, but also for the supervisors for the supervision of ESG risks. And this very first product paved the way to further regulatory developments. For example, right now, in the legislative package in CRR3, CRD6 legislative package, the co-legislators took these common definitions of the ESG factors and the ESG risks, and they included them in the level 1 proposal. Now, in the meantime, we also integrated, again, in a sequential way, in a proportionate way, we started integrating these aspects in EBA's existing guidelines. For example, EBA guidelines on loan origination and monitoring, EBA guidelines on governance and remuneration policies, and so on. And then at the moment, we have also ongoing work that we are developing guidelines on ESG risk management, which is under consultation. And we started the work on, as I mentioned previously, guidelines on institutions stress testing. And the ultimate objective is to also include these aspects in the within the existing STREP elements. Again, to have a longer term perspective, because there is a short-termism, let's say, when it comes to the current framework. It covers a 12-month period, or in the medium term, up to 3 years, but ESG risks may have a longer time horizon. So we would like to, we are going to introduce this perspective, but again, as I said, in proportionate way and in a sequential way. Also, as part of the EBA guidelines on supervisory review and evaluation process, STREP, we are going to look into supervisory assessment of banks' transition plans, assessment of risk, of course, but also how it interacts with the ICAP and ILAP, or the capital adequacy or the liquidity considerations. When it comes to Pillar 1 framework, which is the prudential treatment of exposures for the purpose of capital requirements, we are really at the beginning of the process, and it is a long process. So the objective here is to ensure a robust prudential framework by assessing whether changes would be justified from a risk-based perspective. As I said, as I've been emphasizing, what is very crucial and important is to keep the risk-based perspective of the banking regulation. And here there are some important considerations. As I said earlier, the ESG risks are treated as the drivers of existing risk categories, for example, credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. And the EBA has several mandates under the legislative package. Firstly, at the end of last year, we delivered our report investigating the extent to which the current framework has the tools to account for environmental and social aspects in the prudential treatment of exposures. And this year, we are developing yet another report to assess the feasibility of introducing a standardized methodology to identify and to qualify the exposures, and for different exposure classes. So we are expected to deliver this report by the end of this year. So what are the key principles? First of all, as I emphasized several times, we are taking a risk-based approach, which is what is really the objective of the EBA, is to ensure the resilience of the financial, contribute to resilience, stability, and orderly functioning of the banking sector. We are taking a holistic view because Pillar 1 is only one part, one aspect of the story. We have some other tools as well, and we need to choose the appropriate tools, and we should avoid double counting. Now, when it comes to approach, what we are looking at right now, we are trying to identify what is not covered in the framework and what is covered and what is not covered. Also, one big challenge, data, of course, but also to consider forward-looking aspects when it comes to ESG risks. And we always follow an evidence-based approach, and not only historical data, but also potential scientific evidence. And at the moment, where we are, the EBA is standing on the basis of the, let's say, the findings of our first report, is that at the moment there is the need to better use of existing mechanism, and we should really focus on targeted enhancements to what we have in the framework, rather than working on a potential dedicated risk-weighted adjustment factors, such as the green supporting factor or brown penalizing factor. We don't have evidence to justify these interventions. So the key should be to focus on some targeted enhancements. And my last slide, the EBA's work on the standards and labels, which is not risk-based compared to the previous slides. The focus were the 3 pillars of the Basel framework. So the EBA received a call for advice from the European Commission on green loans and mortgages, and we published our opinion and our reports last year in December, but 3.5 months ago. So this request from the European Commission is based on the European Commission's strategy for financing transition to a sustainable economy, if you want to call it renewed sustainable finance framework. And the focus of the Commission's request is banks lending to retail, green lending to retail and SME borrowers. And in its request to the EBA, the European Commission asked for points. So there are the 4 building blocks of the request. First of all, the European Commission asked the EBA to provide an overview of green lending in the EU markets. And secondly, to identify related market practices, how banks define these green loans. And secondly, EBA was asked to provide a voluntary green loan definition based on the EU taxonomy. Thirdly, measures to encourage and facilitate uptake of green loans while ensuring the protection of retail borrowers. And finally, the EBA was asked to look into banks' green loan origination processes and practices. So to be able to deliver on this request as a first step, and also to be able to provide an evidence-based policy advice to the European Commission, we launched a data collection exercise. It was a fairly successful data collection exercise. It was voluntary, but 83 banks from 27 countries took part in this exercise, which covered over 52% of total assets in the European Economic Area. And at the end, based on the analysis that we carried out, we came up with an advice to the European Commission. And in a nutshell, we told the European Commission that we see a need to introduce a voluntary green loan definition and a green loan label based on the definition in the EU for green loans. And then we explain how a pragmatic and flexible approach can be taken in this regard. Secondly, in the report, we discuss why and how such framework, such as the green loan definition and a green loan label, can be linked to existing initiatives, such as the EU Green Bond Standard and the taxonomy disclosures. Then we highlight the importance of embedding such framework in public support schemes, because financial support is very important. Then we have also in the report some specific advice in relation to the review of mortgage credit directive in the EU, that we argue that the green mortgages, the concept of green mortgages, should be integrated in the mortgage credit directive. And finally, we also highlight the importance of taking a further investigation, further work on transition finance, which was not in the scope of this EBA report. So that's it from me. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ali. Very clear presentation. Yeah, relevant for understand both the financial and investment activities. We have some time for Q&A. If there are any questions. For the speakers? No.
Maybe I just ask a question to all the speakers, and maybe in particular also to the Italian case, because I think the difficulty is maybe for a country that has all these regulations, all these suggestions, right? I mean, voluntary principles like the ones we have developed, the ones of the bank, in the IMF. I mean, they're all this is all guidance, and some things will be translated into bylaws or laws. But I see a proliferation of very complex, because I mean, just these presentations show the complexity. So my question is, how do you go from all this guidance to what a country is doing, so to the implementation? How do you manage to take all this information, its complexity into account when you actually have to deliver at the national level? Because I mean, when I'm listening, I mean, following, okay, there is a lot of theory there, but I'm thinking, wow, I mean, the moment you're a member state and you really have to translate this at the national level, it's a complex exercise. So my question really is for all of you, but in particular for Valeria, is like, what are the steps that you are taking in order to, I saw that, for instance, you refer to our principles, you refer to other principles. So I guess you take all this complexity into consideration.
Thank you. So may I maybe starting answering and then leaving the floor to the other panelists. So yes, thank you for the question, which is actually, let's say, the basis of our work, because indeed we need to take into account the different layers, not just the level of the principle, but also we had to take into account that there is a complex and fast evolving regulatory framework that it's somehow, let's say, shaping the road. So I think that the approach that we had was to be as much as comprehensive and holistic as possible. So this is why we opened a dedicated space such as the platform that is trying to connect all the relevant parties that are somehow touched by the sustainability challenge. So from the public side, we have our ministry, but of course also the Ministry of Environment. There is the Ministry of Enterprises that is joining, and also all the financial regulators, and each one has its own angles on and actually their own agenda on the sustainability challenge. And also, I would like to say that the second driver has also been to have a constant and establish let's say a dialogue with private stakeholders, which have to add also their vision and what is happening in the markets in terms of the sustainability challenge. Coming to, let's say, the content and how we establish the priorities, we have been helped somehow by the project that the first of the two projects that I mentioned during the presentation, which insisted mainly, helped us in identifying the barriers to sustainable investment. And we did it interviewing a series of stakeholders. So I think we had more than 30 interviews during the project with financial intermediaries, funds, banks, operators, and also some large private companies. And this helped us in identifying which were the main obstacles and where we had to concentrate our efforts. And I think the answer somehow reflects what has been, what are some our structural fragilities which are specific to the Italian market, but matches with the relevant, let's say, maybe some common issues in this market that are related to data, to analysis of exposure to risk. So what we are trying to do is to define solutions that are specific for our fragilities, and what the approach that we are following is the one of taking all the relevant part inside this journey to build the road together and try to let's say really act on the most fragile parts, which, for instance, in our case, could be the issues for SMEs, which, if you think about the regulation, the European regulation, they are somehow at the boundaries. They are not, especially the unlisted ones, are outside the scope of the regulation, but actually they are the ones that are experiencing most of the difficulties, for instance, in terms of access to finance. So we're trying to identify some solution that can solve the two problems in the same time. I hope this give you a little bit of more of the background, but happy to take any follow-up question on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe we go with another. We received a question. Is that correct?
Yes.
Online. So maybe
I also have a question.
Just a question, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, but please, there was one before.
For Ali, could Ali provide more details on the alignment with the EU green bonds and the green taxonomy, especially for large social housing portfolios, for which the green taxonomy criteria are just not fit for purpose? This is the question. Please.
Yes, yeah, sure, Sebastian. Thank you for raising this. So, first of all, on this, let me start from the second one. We are not, I mean, in our report, we are not, let's say, discussing the EU taxonomy, right? This is at the moment being discussed for, let's say, the EU platform on sustainable finance. The European Commission is working hard to make sure that the EU's taxonomy works on the ground, so the usability and data aspects. So this is not something that we cover in our report. And we understand the challenges the stakeholders, both financial market participants and non-financial undertakings, may face when it comes to the implementation of the EU taxonomy. So this is it was not the purpose of this report. But in the report, we when we are proposing a voluntary green loan definition and a green loan label, we explain how this should interact and this should align with the EU green bond standards, in the sense that how, for example, the grandfathering, for example, the asset perimeter, what it should be covered, and how the taxonomy alignment should take place, but with some flexibility. For example, in the EU Green Bond Standards, you have the 15% flexibility pocket. And similar to that, we are also telling the European Commission, look, the EU taxonomy alignment has some challenges, at least at this stage, and such a framework should take into account banks' other efforts that are not necessarily aligned with the EU taxonomy. Here we are talking about loans, at least at the point of loan origination. And until the market reaches a certain level of maturity where the data is now improved, where the usability of the EU taxonomy is improved. So from that point of view, this is where we are also, let's say, trying to mirror certain features of the EU Green Bond Standard, introducing the flexibility, as well as the other features of the EU Green Bond standards, for example, the asset parameters, as I said, the grandfathering. Yes, those aspects. I don't know if you have any follow-up question on that, Sebastian, but this, in a nutshell, this is what we are saying, what we are discussing at great length, these aspects.
Please, there.
Yes. So my question,
Sorry, if I ask the Secretary of the UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management, please there.
Thank you. Yes. My question was also about taxonomies. We heard from the first presentation that there are around 40 of them currently, and that they're really key for greening the investments. But so one question is they seem to only be applying to projects. But how about the more strategic level, which is the case, for instance, for the strategic environmental assessments that apply to plans, programs, policies? So what I could understand that taxonomies apply to projects. So that's one question. And also this linkage between the well-established tool of environmental assessments that have existed for past 50 years. So taxonomies are very new tools, and sometimes I wonder if the linkage between the environmental assessments and taxonomies is always very clear. And a third one was about good governance. How do taxonomies ensure stakeholder consultation and public participation So those were sort of three questions: linkages with the environmental assessment, application to strategic plans and programs, and then this good governance, public participation element in them. I don't know if the gentleman from the European Banking Authority was talking about the alignment and the efforts to ensure good governance. Maybe just to explain a bit more.
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna take a view from an ESG risk management point of view. So, this is what we are focusing on when it comes to banks. So we want to ensure that the banks integrate ESG risk consideration in their governance arrangements and in their processes, in their policies. So in the sense that banks having certain exposure to their counterparties, we want to make sure that they take into account ESG aspects. This doesn't necessarily mean taxonomy alignment of the activities. As you rightly pointed out, the taxonomy, the EU taxonomy, is activity-based. And from a risk point of view, we want to ensure that banks, even if they are, let's say, lending, they have exposures to a counterparty operating in the fossil fuels, we want to ensure that they acknowledge the potential transition, let's say, risk that such exposure may be subject to, and see whether the counterparty has certain, let's say, transition plans. They have how they are managing their activities, and how the bank is then in turn managing its own exposure on their balance sheet. So this is really the idea behind the let's say the risk management and the governance arrangements. And then on top of that, we want to make sure that these ESG considerations, they are not only at the business level, for example, level 1, line 1. It goes to line 2, credit risk, and it goes to even to board, and it is at the highest level. They are discussed, they are reported, and they are acknowledged at all different levels of the governance in the bank. So this is what we are expecting. I don't know if this answered your question, but please feel free to come up with a follow-up question.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Thank you all. Let me conclude. Recalling that financial stability implies strong attention to ESG risk management, its evaluation of collateral, climate risk, sustainability of program and project topics that are part of the second panel. So let me invite Luca to start with the second panel. Luca, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Giampiero, and thank you all. I think there is no better place than here in Geneva in the United Nations to start the discussion about building an ecosystem. We as an industry, I have the pleasure to represent more than 2,000 banks in Europe, and we have a very large global network of all the mortgage refinancing company around the globe, from emerging countries, Tanzania, Colombia, Indonesia, Mongolia, Japan, Canada, and the US. We feel the responsibility of guiding, giving management instruction to all our actors to be part of this important dream, which is very simple, designing a better future, but it's very complex on how we have to implement. As Fabio Massimo described, I mean, the level of comparability of taxonomy is, still there is a lot of potential for improvement, let's put it this way. The regulatory environment is changing radically for our banks. When you do mortgages for 20, 30 years, you need a certain stability on regulation, which is very difficult to apply, because the nature of the changes that we are facing is very dynamic and is recalibrating the strategy for banks, for actors, for investors on a daily basis. What are the major drivers of changes for banks? Are three major drivers: capital charges, capital absorption, funding cost, and I would say strategic positioning of the bank, which include marketing vis-a-vis the consumer, but also access to investors. All these are completely impacted by this ESG revolution, changing radically the strategy and the thinking of the banks. We as an association, we were European, now we are global. We try to help them in sharing best practices, in trying to reflect on how we can act all together for an ecosystem. The ESG will not be fixed or solved in Europe by changing windows in Stockholm. We have to find a global strategy where we can move international investors. As Ali and Fabio Massimo have highlighted, disclosure is a fundamental element. We need to have common definition. We need to understand the same thing. Otherwise, the challenge of greenwashing is a major risk for banks. You could always fall in a journalist accusing your banks to not have done the maximum or not have done this. So this is a real risk for the banks, which have to put in the list of the risk of action for our stakeholders. Well, allow me to try to find what we should do. I think that if we look at the single market, I'm a strong believer of the single market. But Jacques Delors gave us the key to understand how to face also this challenge and make Europe as a global platform, as a lighthouse for also other markets. Because we have also this responsibility to be the lighthouse, to guide other governments in making the right legislative decision. And this is not simple, because you have to explain the business model. You have to explain why you have to change. It's like with your kids. It's difficult to explain to your kids why we need to change something that, is more or less working. This is the challenge that we face. It's an intellectual, philosophical challenge that is also how we have to build the ecosystem. Today, I have the honor not to be alone, but to have with me key stakeholders in the value chain of the mortgage industry. I would like to start to present and to give the role to all of them. Annette, she's representing all the valuation industry. We have under the European Mortgage Federation, I would say a niche luxury unit, which is looking at the valuation. I think that the valuation is the pillar of the change, and I would like to explain why. First of all, Basel III, which is about to be implemented. I think the Japanese will be one of the first one. I think the Singaporean have already implemented this. Japan will implement the Basel III on the 1st of April, if I'm not mistaken, Fabio Massimo. Europe will be voting for Basel III and will be in a few months' time, probably January next year. And the US and the UK will follow. But all the banking sector is changing because of Basel III. And that's an opportunity, but the valuation will change radically in the concept of Basel III. Basel III speaks about a prudent value or sustainable value. And this is intellectually is a challenge for the operators because we are changing from pictures, the market value, to a movie, the prudent value. We are moving from stock information to dynamic information. And in the mortgage market, we have a problem that we don't have the crystal ball, and we cannot anticipate what will be the value of a property in 20 years' time. Someone tried to do this in 2008. It didn't work out very nicely. So, I mean, it's a really, the French will use the expression casse-tête. It's really difficult to put this on the ground. And Annette today, and I would like to start with her, will try to tell us, to share with us, I mean, what are the discussions into the market? And then I would like to ask also Alex after Annette to guide us on. Yes. Okay. Because I mean, the important is that we should agree on definition. And valuation is important to explain to consumer if they make an investment in their house, if the value of the property will increase or not. This is a question that we all have as consumer. But it's also the question fundamental for the banks. They want to know what is the capital charges that they have to apply to that loan. And this is extremely important for the investors, who is at the end of the value chain, but is the engine moving the entire value chain. So this is a fundamental question. I would like to start exactly with Annette and ask her to share the good work that has been done under the evaluation committee in the EMF, and what are the different points of different position, different reflection. Annette, can I give you the floor? Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Luca, and hello together. I will share some slides. Let me check.
Maybe those online see it?
Yes, I think so.
I think those online can see it. Yes.
Okay.
Can anybody see the slides? Yeah.
I think everybody online, we don't see it in the room.
Okay.
I don't know if you can share the screen, like the previous speaker shared the screen, but otherwise we will follow on.
Maybe we fix it, Annette. I mean, like this, we can follow like this. Go ahead. Thank you very much. I mean.
Okay, thanks. Well, yes, as Luca already introduced, I think it's absolutely important issue also in the whole context of ESG and a sustainable finance to cover the aspect of valuation, because it's one of the crucial aspects that we have to consider. And as Luca already said, there is a change in in the mindset, not just focus on the market value in this context, but on a more long-term sustainable value concept. And I want to give you just in some slides a short overview about what's going on in this field if it comes to banking regulation, of course, what we discuss in the European Mortgage Federation on this issue. So, and I think it's really good connection to the main content of this conference today, and having a look on the principles that are one of the main aspects of today's conference. And it also says that you have to look on the long-term sustainable value, and the you have to look at the life of whatever asset it is, but here especially we talk about properties, to look how it will develop in the future. And it's not just the aspect of sustainability in the sense of green, it's also sustainability in the sense of economic aspects. So we have to put this together in some way, and this is also very important, not to just focus on one of the aspects. Valuation has to cover all the risks of a property, and it's not possible to just focus on one and the other and do an explicit value focusing on ESG, doing one explicitly focusing on any price increases or decreases or whatever. But in some way we have to put it together, but of course being transparent, and that's not really part of the value itself, it's part of the valuation report, to focus on the risks, to explain the risks of a property, to make sure that whoever is the consumer of this valuation report, if it's a bank or if it's the client or a buyer or a seller or whoever, has the opportunity to understand the special risks of this property, and of course the effects on the value in total. So I think the principles are a really good starting point, showing the importance of this issue. And what we have experienced in the past years is, of course, we still have the market value. The market value is important, and we need it for a lot of reasons, for a lot of fields of application in the banking sector, but of course also in many others. But what we also have seen is a lot of development in this long-term, sustainable, prudent, however you call it, valuation concepts. There is a quite old one that already exists in some countries, which is the mortgage lending value, which very much focused on a very conservative way of valuation, reflecting the future saleability of a property. There's Spain, there's Germany, there's Poland, who have such concepts for already very long time. And in recent years, but we're also on the international level, there's a huge discussion about this. And we have this property value in the new CRR that will, with a very high probability, will be implemented in the CRR and has to be used from beginning of next year. So this is the implementation of Basel III, and more or less exactly the definition, I will give it on the next slide, on this property value is already part of the Basel III framework. So it's not just a European discussion, it's an international one, and it's important to have a look on this. And what we have seen, especially in the last months, maybe 1 or 2 years, are very different words, wordings, definitions, concept, however you will call it, on a sustainable or an ESG market that especially reflects on these aspects in the context of market value. I will come to this later, but before I want to give you an idea of this new valuation concept that will be implemented in the CRR, this property value. And as you see, it seems to be something between a very conservative mortgage lending value and the market value. It should be prudently and conservative. It should exclude expectation on price increases. And the market value, you see it in Z, is the upper limit for this property value. So the idea is to consider the future development of this property. You see it especially in double E, having a focus on the term, on the life of the loan. And as Luca already said in his introduction, of course, it's not possible to predict a value in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time, how long the term of the loan should be. This is not possible, but of course it's possible to not just focus on what happens today. You can have a look on future risks, you can have a look on or you can analyze what it means for the property, and especially for the ESG aspects, and can include such information into the valuation concept. So this is the idea of this property value to be, to have this long-term aspect included in valuation, and this is, the huge difference to the market value. So it's very important to distinguish here very, very clearly, and I'm sure Alex will come to this point as well, to make sure that the market value still is the market value as it is defined, and there are a huge amount of standards and definitions, and so that it's absolutely clear in the valuation profession and also in the banking sector what is a market value. It's a spot value that covers today's situation, what the willing buyer, willing seller will pay today for this kind of property. And it's not possible to have a kind of sustainable market value or ESG market value. A market value reflects as much ESG as the market currently reflects. And of course, it can be clarified very, very transparent in the valuation report, maybe more transparent than we have done it in the past, and maybe it has a higher influence than in the past, of course. But it's still a market value, and not a market value plus more ESG. That's not possible. And on the other side, of course, you can have long-term sustainable valuation concepts like a mortgage lending value, like a property value, to make sure that these are concepts that have this future aspects included into the valuation concept. So it is very, very important to have very, very be very, very clear if it comes to the wording of this different concept. Don't mix it up. And that's what we currently experience a little bit in the whole discussion about ESG risks and implementation of any kind of sustainable ESG, whatever market values. This is in my opinion, it's dangerous because it will confuse. Last but not least, it will confuse the whole products that you get from the values, to make absolutely sure if I ask for market value, I know what I get, and if I ask for a long-term value, I know what I get, and it shouldn't be mixed it up. So this is a very important message I want to send, and this is also one we have very much discussed in the European Mortgage Federation, in the Valuation Committee, where to make this absolutely clear that here we do not have a mixture. And last but not least, and it's a very important piece of work that we have published last year, is a paper where we have tried to give some first ideas how to operationalize this new value in the CRR, this property value, focusing on existing valuation concepts, especially the market value, and how with any kind of adjustments we can derive a property value from the basis of the market value. It would be too much now to give you a full understanding of the contents of the paper. I just want to highlight it here, and what we are very, very proud and very happy is that it's not just a discussion within the European Mortgage Federation and the ECBC. We also discussed with the IBC, with RCS on it, so we are happy to have them on the table, and we have also part of this work done here in the paper, and giving a first understanding of this new property value. And of course, we will continue our work to develop kind of methodological ideas, kind of framework that can be the basis for this new valuation concept, making sure that it finally will fulfill, of course, the regulatory requirements given in the CRR, but of course also to give an impact on this whole discussion on the proper consideration of future risks in evaluation for banking purposes. So this, from my side, my first introduction into this issue. And well, Luca, Alex, you.
Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you very much. I mean, you really helped me to set the scene, and I would like to highlight why I think that that's part of the strategic revolution that, I mean, the European regulators are putting on the table for the banks. So we say that, I said at the beginning that the market value is the picture, and we need to build a movie, which is the prudent value. And it's a very difficult exercise. The only instrument that the banks have is a continued monitoring, continued adaptation of the value in order to make the link between the different pictures of your property. In doing this, the European regulators are given a fantastic instrument to all the European banks with the implementation of Basel III. Because in this famous article 229, the banks can change the loan-to-value of the property in case of energy efficiency investment. What does it mean? It means that if you want to make an investment in your house, the bank has the excuse to change the value of your property and moving this to a less risky bucket. Well, for you it's good, because probably you will get a mortgage to a better price. For the bank it's good, because probably they will put this a bit less capital in that asset. So the bank has all the interest to take a new picture of your property and start to build a movie over time. So that's a real driver for transition. And I think that was done with a very strategic purposes. Because if the banks can build up a new mortgage portfolio, an average banks in Italy, a big bank, for example, UniCredit has more than 1.5 million mortgages in their portfolio. So if they put a strategy to clean up the portfolio, they can make also green mortgages, with the green mortgages, green bonds. And they can arrive to the second driver of savings, which is funding. So you see that, I mean, everything starts with an efficient way of making valuation. The importance of also IT innovation. I'm speaking about the AVM, the automated valuation methods that can help banks in making this exercise. So that's just, now let's move to the most boring part of the story, which is definitions. I mean, without definition, we are lost. And we have an expert, and he's the less boring person in the industry, Alex, that is the only one able to animate such a topic. So Alex, I'm putting a bit of expectation on your presentation. Please shake the audience and give us emotions around definition for mortgage values. Alex, are you with us?
We see the presentation.
We see the presentation, which is a good sign, but we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Fantastic, yes. Alex. Good to see you.
Perfect. Because I'm not normally known for being quiet, so that's unusual for me. But anyway, what I want to do is first of all talk you a little bit about how we see ESG, and then I'm happy to discuss prudential value. So we very much have the two issues slightly separate. And one of the things I just want to point out is we brought out the latest edition of the International Valuation Standards very recently on the 31st of January 2024. It's got an effective date of 2025. And what's particularly relevant in relation to it is we have new sections on data and inputs that's really looking at the quality of data that you should use within your valuation, new sections on valuation models, also on quality control, which we believe is a very important part of the valuation process, and documentation and reporting requirements. And you can see at top, you have the general standards. Underneath, we have asset standards, which give specific standards. And what I just wanted to talk you through directly, which is relevant to long-term sustainable value, is first of all, some of the requirements for data and inputs. So within data and inputs, it addresses the importance of data quality and valuations and requires valuers to assess and select data and inputs using professional judgment. So if we look at data, you have the general data, which is all that quantitative and qualitative information that you look at. And then you have your inputs, which are the data assumptions and adjustments determined to be relevant and assessed or selected by the valuer to be used in the valuation based on their professional judgment. And the main characteristic of data, be it for ESG or anything else, is that it is relevant and observable. And the valuer has got to try and maximize the characteristics shown below. So accuracy, the data is free from error and bias and reflects the characteristics that they're designed to measure. Completeness, set of data is sufficient to address attributes of the assets or liabilities. Timeliness, data reflects the market condition as of the valuation date. And transparency, the source of the data can be traced from the origin. Now, data very much interconnects with models. We have the two together. We have very similar requirements for models as well. But what we've now done is we've expanded the standards to include the consideration of environmental, social, and governance factors. And it reflects the growth in ESG and valuations across all specialisms. And some of the things I should point out, you've already talked about a number of taxonomies here, EU taxonomy, Asia taxonomy. There's different standards in different markets all the time. I seem to be working with backing music, but I quite like that in a way. But what you can see here is the valuer needs to be aware of relevant legislation and frameworks in relation to ESG factors impacting a valuation. And the impact of significant ESG factors need to be considered in determining the value of a company, because we have business valuations, assets or liabilities. But ESG factors and the ESG regulatory environment should be considered in valuations to the extent that they are measurable and would be considered reasonable by a valuer applying professional judgment. And within your scope of work, the valuer needs to state the ESG factors they are considering. Within their reporting, the two should align. Now, moving a little bit from here and moving away from the slides to the concept of prudential value, we are in discussions with EMF and part of their valuation committee looking at it, and there are some issues in relation to it. At the moment, there is a definition that is open to interpretation. It seems to mix between price and market value. Another aspect that is difficult is that there are data challenges in different markets at the moment. So we're very much engaged in discussions trying to look at a valuation methodology for this sort of sustainable value, but it may not be the same answer in every market. For example, if we look in parts of, I'm going to pick on Germany because they're next there. Germany has very good data. There will be a lot of data in the major conurbations in Germany. But if I take you to countries that were potentially former parts of Eastern Europe, it's very difficult to find that data, and it's very difficult to look at a cycle. And when we think of prudential value on an international basis, which we have to do as an international valuation stand setter, I've even had my Australian members argue with me, show me that there's a property cycle in Australia, because residential property has just gone up over the past 40 to 50 years. So we're very much working to deal with these challenges and see how we incorporate prudential value into the methodology. But we will be issuing a perspective paper in the next few months highlighting some of the challenges, but we're all very much working together to resolve it, because on the whole, we don't do forecasting. No one would have forecasted what happened with the coronavirus. It's very difficult to make predictions in valuation, though when we are doing cash flows, we are looking forward. We are bringing them back to NPV, and therefore we're looking at it in that way. So it's really working out how we integrate this within the valuation process. There's also, you have market value. There is a worry that you move from mark to market to mark to model. And I agree with Luca that AI is moving along at a tremendous rate at the moment. And in our agenda consultation, which will be coming out later this year in June, we will be looking at the topics of artificial intelligence. We'll also be looking further at ESG, because we believe that AI may be a key to help us with a lot of the data that is required, particularly on the S&G element, because environmental is something that has been considered by many of our valuers for many years. So I've just given you a few points there for consideration, but really happy to have an open discussion on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I mean, you helped me to set the scene and helping me also understand how it's important to have a global overview on in terms of evaluation and how, as you said correctly, the different regulations have an impact, a real market impact, a real consumer impact in commercial space and residential space. So, I mean, we have to look really to so many elements. But I mean, allow me to move to the next speaker, Christian. I mean, we had, I think, 7 speakers today saying what the banks should be doing. And we have only one banker, and the poor banker that is on the table is a Christian, who is managing, I think, the mortgage portfolio of the second largest bank in Denmark. Well, Denmark, I think, is the closest thing to happiness that you can see and find in the world, in the sense that
Finland is first.
Finland is first, yeah, but they have a difficult neighbor closer than Denmark. But I mean, what I'm saying is simply that, I mean, one of the reasons of the happiness of Denmark is also the fact that, I mean, a young person, 20, 21 years, can go to a bank and get a mortgage and start their own life. Because at the end of the day, the ability of building your future is a proxy to happiness, the closer that you can. And banks, they play an important role. So, I mean, Christian, how many dreams of new life you have in your portfolio and how you manage those dreams? I mean, Christian.
Yeah, I will talk a little bit about this today. Thank you for this very kind introduction, Luca, and thank you for inviting me here today. Let me just share with you. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. Yeah, my name is Christian Bergravn. I'm representing the Jyske Bank Group, as Luca said, the second largest financial institution, a bank in Denmark. And I'm actually representing Jyske Realkredit, which is the mortgage company of the Jyske Bank Group. And I am here today to talk a little bit about the sustainable ecosystem that we have been building up in Jyske Bank, a sustainable ecosystem that has mainly been built on data on buildings. So I will keep a lot of focus on especially data availability, really data to help banks help our clients actually to start energy renovating the buildings that they own. I'll just start a little bit out telling why we actually started doing this. We actually starting collecting data on sustainability. I would say it's 6-7 years ago we actually started collecting data. Back then we didn't really do it to build a sustainable ecosystem. Instead, we actually did it due to investor demand. So we actually wanted to give more ESG information to the investors investing in especially our covered bonds. Back then, and which is still the case, there's been a lot of focus on green buildings, buildings that are compliant with, for instance, the EU taxonomy. But we thought it's good to have green buildings, it's good to finance green buildings, but we also need to look at the rest of the buildings that we actually finance. So we also need to look at buildings that are not energy efficient. So the first thing we did was actually that we collected EPC scores, energy performing certificates, for all Danish buildings. So not only for the buildings that we financed, but we actually collected it for all buildings in Denmark. In Denmark, EPC scores are publicly available. So we actually collected this and we started to show this information to the investors investing in our covered bonds. So here we do not only show the top 15%, the green properties, but we actually also shows the properties that we finance that are not energy efficient. So we also show the properties with EPC score of E, F, and G. Some of these properties in Denmark, an EPC score is valid for 10 years, and it's not mandatory for private homeowners to update the EPC scores. So for some properties, we do not have active EPC scores. Instead, we have estimated EPC scores, which we have done for all the properties where we do not have an active. So we have either active EPC scores or estimated EPC scores for all the properties that we finance. We have EPC scores, and we actually also report on carbon emissions. Again, this is done as an input to our investors. So again, for each property, when we have the EPC score, we know the heated floor area of the building, and we also know the heat source of the building. When we have these parameters, we are able to calculate carbon emissions. So we actually started out providing this information to our investors, but we very quickly realized we can actually also use this in our daily communication with our clients. We have, as you saw on the previous slide, we do have properties with EPC scores that are relatively high. So we do also finance properties that are not energy efficient. So we started looking at all the properties that we financed. We did it. I have simplified it a little bit here. So we divided the properties that we finance into 4 different categories. If you look at this slide, on the vertical line, we have EPC scores. So starting from the left, we have the most energy efficient properties. Going to the right, where we have the less energy efficient properties. On the horizontal line. On the vertical line, we have the heating source. So the lower you go, the less carbon intensive the heating source is, and the higher you go, the more carbon intensive is the heating source of the property. So we actually started to use this to find out which homeowners do we really need to focus on. So the homeowners, of course, that we want to take contact to first was the ones in category number 1. These homeowners, they have a building with a high energy consumption, and they're heating their house by using fossil fuels. So these were actually the first customers that we wanted to reach out to and say, what can we do for you? We can see that your property is not energy efficient and the heating source is highly carbon intensive. So how can we help you? Then we have the category number 2. It is properties that are relatively energy efficient, but are using fossil fuel heat sources. And then we have category 3, which are properties where the heating source has a low carbon intensity, but where there is quite a large energy consumption in the property. And then finally, we have category 4, where these are basically the properties that are green property. So it's property with a low energy demand and also with a low energy carbon intensive heat source. So by dividing our clients into these 4 categories, we could actually see what clients do we need to focus on at first. And that is, of course, the category 1 clients. But we are a bank. We are not energy consultants. So we can identify the customers by using data, but we cannot help them energy renovate or change heat source. So we have made corporations with different external companies that can either help the homeowners to do energy renovations. We have made a cooperation with Bocek, which is an energy consultants company, so they can actually look at buildings and say what are the renovations that you need to do to make the building more energy efficient. Then we have also made a cooperation with Bodil Energy, which is a company that has specialized in heat pumps and solar cell panels. So especially for properties that are heated by fossil fuels, we recommend them to get in contact with Bodil Energy. So we have made different corporations with external companies. So we identify the customers, and then we can refer them to different external companies. Then we have actually also made a cooperation with the Danish Technical University. The Danish Technical University have built a model that can actually if we are able to collect energy consumption from the property, we can actually combine it with outside temperature and wind, and the model can actually say what are the potential for energy renovation this building. Because one of the big challenges for us is actually how do we motivate the borrowers actually to make energy renovations. But we are trying to do this firstly by identifying the customers and then trying to send them to one of our external companies that we work together with. With this, we have also tried to set some targets. How will we actually work with this going forward? So we have actually set some targets for the number of customers that we want to refer to our external clients. And we have also set a target for a reduction in fossil-based heating for private properties. Really to measure, do we also achieve our targets? Are we actually able to refer clients, and will they actually then start also renovate their buildings and change the heat source? But for us, we have very much focus on data, and we, even though in Denmark we are quite lucky and we do have a lot of data on the properties that we finance, there's still need for more data, so we can motivate homeowners to renovate their buildings. That was what I have prepared.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much. I mean, of course, I don't want to say that Christian is the best guy in the class, but I mean, of course, in Denmark, they are quite advanced on what they do, and they are in a very luxury position because they have access to data, they have public authorities ready to cooperate. What Christian has shown is that banks cannot take action alone. They need data, they need people that certify the data, they have to be sure, they have to have access. GDPR is a problem, for example, because if you have access to the EPC and you don't have the consensus of the consumer of managing the EPC, you cannot make a green bond with this information. So it's really a complex issue that has to be fixed. And in this, I would like to pull in Raul, because banks, they need a lot of advice or support or people that are helping them in building this ecosystem. All these soft elements are fundamental. And I think Ernst & Young is doing excellent work. I mean, Raul, I don't know if you want to show us, your idea of ecosystem and where a company like yours is stepping in and helping the bank to make the difference. I don't know if Raul, I can give you the floor.
Yes. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, I'm not too sure. I came in as an Ernst & Young today, but I will be an Ernst & Young advisor. I'm part of the real estate market advisory group, and I've been a project finance director for 15 years. So when we talk about long-term value and we talk about project finance, and we've heard a lot about, or maybe we've heard some about cash flows and value, and I think this is for investors is very important. We need to find always a way where to actually put all the value and make sure that what we give and what we invest on it's there. We've done already some work related to sustainability and finance in the past. The most recent work is around industrial cities, industrial real estate. We've done this with the people from the United Cities and Sustainability Center from Norway. So we have quite a lot of thought leadership, and I have seen today in the first part of the webinar quite a lot of new information that we all know, and of course advisors and bankers are using all the time. I think it's very important, something we've mentioned about data, evidences of what is the status of real estate or the projects themselves are always important, whether the project is going to be built. So we are at the phase of design, or it's already been built and we need to look into retrofit. There is not enough data to be provided to the investors so that the investors can assess whether we are talking about green finance or something else. And this is important. We need to make sure we have that. I fear that the slides that I have in front of me are a little bit too general for what we have seen today. As you know, I have come kind of in a ranger mode in the last minute, substituting somebody from the land registry, the UK. And I have to say that as an investor in my former life, one of the most important values that I needed to see in any investment was that we had a proper title. And a proper title has to be based on good data so that we would understand where are we investing. I cannot tell you where I'm going to go with my investment if I don't know what I'm investing now. And the title and the data on the title and then the data on whatever I'm going to design and how I'm going to produce it, and how I will give evidences of the impacts of the lack of impacts, so that these are going to be investable assets, is the most important part right now. I heard today something about green premiums towards brown discounts, and I keep on hearing that there are not enough evidences, and I disagree. If you look into the buildings and don't think about sustainability, just look about efficiency. Nobody wants, or if you have to choose between something that is efficient and something that is not efficient, efficiency and sustainability in real estate are basically the same thing. You want something that is efficient, that is better built when it is done, because the ultimate value, the residual value of that asset, if we put it in financial terms, is higher. But while we are not going for the residual value and we go for the net present value of the rents that it's capable to attract, it's also higher. So it becomes again a cash flow issue. It becomes balance sheet for the company. And if I am able to show that to the investors, to the bankers, through EPCs or any other terms, be it EU taxonomy alignment, be it SFDR, CSRD, any of the frameworks that we use for reporting on sustainability, the bankers, the investors, the clients are going to understand that we are talking about green assets. We're talking about green finance because it's finance given to green assets. And I think this is the most important part. We hear a lot about how to secure that ratio in the portfolio of the bankers. And I think it's very important that we gather all this information and we gather in a way that not only the bankers can use it, but also the investors, because if the investors don't know what they are going to provide, they will not be able to find it. And this is actually the work that we do in advisory. In most cases, one of the bits of the work that we do. In most cases, we are here basically to catalyze the knowledge that we have from the technical side of the construction with the socioeconomic impact reports and the environmental impact reports, and transfer that information into sustainability frameworks. The KPIs are ultimately the same. The definitions are different. Maybe the denominations are more different, and that's why the taxonomies are here. But the ultimate KPI has to be there. In the end, it's all a question of what is the impact of the square meter of each of those assets. And the impact is always the same. You can nominate it and denominate it in any measurements that you want, in any ways that you want, but somebody has to come down there, take the measurements, and make sure that we explain this well to the investors. So I think in the definition of sustainability, coming back to the slides, we've heard today a lot about it. For me, it is a question of long-term value. rather than short-term value. We already have a very clear idea about the importance of green financing and how we need to use finance to become more sustainable. I will make emphasis only on the importance of retrofitting the existing assets, because it's a very difficult thing to do, and I think this is where the investors need to look into it. And I think that from there on, I will only focus on 4 parts of the value chain in real estate that without which we cannot do any kind of investments. And first of all, again, data. And data, please make sure that we attain all the information we need on the title. We get all the information from the technology that make scalable technology so that we can get the best impacts. Coming back to the policymakers, very important that we have an understanding of what is planned. Urban development plans need to be very clear so that when we propose cash flows within time, we don't have any questions. And we don't have any questions because for the finance professionals, for the CFOs of the companies, having a steady cash flow, a secure cash flow is better than to have a very rich one that is moving up and down. And we don't want surprises. So one thing is to provide something that is green, but if it is not secure, it's going to be difficult to find an investor that is going to go for it. And this is actually, if you allow me for a second, it's one of the most attractive parts when we talk about social real estate or social housing or affordable housing. Some people ask sometimes, why do we, in sustainability real estate comes already that, okay, it's sustainable, it's better, it's not going to be that costly to maintain, and it's probably going to have a better residual value at the end because it's a better building. Yes? Yeah, so I just finished that with the last point in here, which is that basically that when we get sustainability embedded in the planning, we get longer value, and it starts from the very beginning. So, the circle closes there. I'm going to stop here because I think I'm done with my time, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Raul. And before opening the floor to questions, I would like just to try to conclude the different issue is that, yes, the idea that we all have in mind is very simple, but how this will be put on the ground, on the real life of people is very complicated. And how to mobilize a global institutional investor base is even more complicated. But what do we want to achieve? Well, I think that what we want to achieve is very simple. We have to understand the magnitude of this effort. In Europe, probably we have more than 200 million of dwellings not aligned with the Paris Agreement. So more or less, I think all of us living in those buildings have to make an investment. We all have to look to a company that will come and make some kind of works in your house. And this has to be done in the next 5-8 years. It's a real challenge on how to build the ecosystem. So all our banks can play an important role, but also we have to understand very technical details. For example, in some countries, more than 70% of the people are living in apartments, not in single houses. So the decision should be a collective decision of all the people living in the building to make the retrofitting. So we go behind the economics. We need a strong incentive from public authorities to make this happen in a coordinated way. And we have to work all together to remove bottlenecks, to incentivize people, city halls, because at the end of the day, we have to redesign the cities for tomorrow. And probably we should also be careful not to want to put, for example, wonderful windows isolation in emerging countries. Sometimes a roof, a green roof can prevent the use of air conditioning, which is much more healthy for the building or for the general economy of the ecosystem. So finding the right solution in the right place is the trick that we have to have the courage to do. We can do this only sharing. And I would like to conclude with the famous 3 words of Jacques Delors. Competition, we need a free market able to compete. We need cooperation, exchange of best practices as much as possible. And we need solidarity. working all together and help who is behind, to don't leave anyone behind, because affordability and sustainability can clash at a certain point. We should not be naive. With this kind of conclusive remarks, I would like to open the floor, and I'm sure that my dear panelists are more than happy to take any of your questions. Thank you all for the kind attention.
If there are no questions, maybe I start with some comments, because what you say is very relevant. And it's interesting because, I mean, EC sort of, you started from competition, ended with solidarity, we turn it around, we start with solidarity. And just to remind us, and also for those that joined us today online, we will have an in-person only meeting, because we have meetings of the intergovernmental process called the Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management that are in person only. And on the 2nd of October, we will have a workshop on housing affordability. So for those of you that are interested in attending and presenting your views, because what you described today is a lot to do with sustainability, but also a lot to do with affordability. And the solidarity aspect, of course, is very dear to the UN. That's why we are here, right? We are looking at what we call, especially my division, we try to underline the housing, there's a housing emergency. So we talk about the climate emergency, we had a pandemic, but the housing emergency has been there for rather a long time, and our region is becoming worse, especially in larger cities. So when we look now, what we discussed today refers to a building, right? We are looking at the building, single building, multiple occupancy, but is in the context of the city that the planning takes place, right? So the issue of affordability is for the city itself. How do we make buildings more energy efficient? And I agree with you, Raul, that very often sustainability for buildings is only seen as energy efficiency, although there are other aspects that should be included. But okay, where comes in the solidarity aspect? So, which is really how do we make housing in the city affordable to everybody and to those that should actually live in the city or in the city center in some cases, and then they simply cannot afford it. So what we discussed today, and also the power of the banks, can also is not only to make housing more sustainable, but also more affordable. So I'm sure that many of you will also put the presentation in this context, and will be very interesting also from yourself, also as mortgages. How is the mortgages landscape going to look and address the issue of solidarity, making things more affordable? Having said that, I think that one thing I want to recognize today is that one chunk of the work that we were missing for many years within EC was the financing aspect. And somehow we went on for years and years and years ignoring that, right? Because we are about solidarity, we are about affordability, but the financing aspect. And I have to thank really Giampiero, because since he joined REM and then the committee, he insisted that without talking about this, we're not credible. Because the solutions have to do with financing, and will come from financing, will come from those aspects. So I'm really grateful to Giampiero. Just for those of you that don't know, we go long, really a long time. Back in 2008, for instance, we found ourselves with the REM and the housing committee having to face the financial crisis, which was caused by the housing bubble. And that's why you are also talking about the unpredictability. Well, some had predicted after we discovered it after, but okay, someone has said something, but it wasn't listened to, so it's irrelevant. But we found ourselves in the committee with a lot of doubts and also misunderstanding of what was happening. And we even went to New York to talk to ambassadors in New York, because there was a thirst of knowledge on what was happening. And while, of course, the specialists knew exactly, and the banking sector was part of it, they knew what was happening. Those involved in the financing of housing were knowledgeable. Our side, which is the diplomats, but at the same time also the delegates, those that are really in the regulatory system from the other side, we didn't understand what was happening. It was not clear. So really, we made it our purpose to go to New York to talk about the housing bubble. And out of that conversation, we created some principles at the time for sustainable real estate market. And believe it or not, nobody had talked about that before. So there was, okay, it was back in 2008, many years have passed, but there was no idea of sustainable real estate market. And this concept is very much relevant today, because that's what we are talking about now. It's financing for infrastructure, not only for real estate, but also for projects of urban infrastructure that have to follow some principles of sustainability. So just to conclude from my end, is just try to also give you the appetite to participate in our conversation also when it comes on the other side, the solidarity side, the affordability side, for which the message has to pass as well, that without a financing world, we cannot advance. So for me, it's very important we have this workshop today, but hopefully that also we bring the output of this workshop at the committee session when we are discussing with the cities and with the governments how to make housing more affordable.
If I add, following what you are saying, let me say that affordability, in my vision, imply affordable price, but also affordable loans, affordable mortgages. And for this is very relevant green financing. Green financing is fundamental for public sector, member states and public authorities and so on, but also for private citizens to take the opportunity to buy the home. Just a comments. Technical. It's very technical, but during the last several speakers say about long-term value, prudent value, and so on. I agree. It's impossible for a forecast market cycle in the long term. So this implies that to preserve a real value in long term is necessary to link characteristics with ESG risks. Resilience, energy efficiency, and so on. In other words, life cycle is strictly connected with the long-term value. Thank you.
Allow me to react, Paola, to your kind invitation. We want to work close with you. I mean, I had the pleasure to invite Giampiero to we have a specific ecosystem working group in Rome with ABI, the Italian Banking Association. So Giampiero will be coming, and we want to work closely with you. And also allow me to invite you probably to our next plenary meeting in Reykjavik, where I think it will be very important for us to join forces with you. Because I mean, the priority probably will be competition, solidarity, but at the end of the day, we play on the same on the same board. We will also invite all our global partners working on the ground to make affordable housing in emerging markets. So I think your contribution to our debate will be extremely important. Also, we have to say that the discussion now in Europe is about competition and how the ESG discussion can actually boost the competition of our industrial sector. We will have the pleasure to have the former Commissioner of Trade, Phil Hogan, who will come to speak on what is the challenge for Europe on how to guide trade innovation as well. I mean, because this is a part of the game. And I think that working closely with you, it's for us an added value. And we are ready to bring all our network, which is at the end of the day 40% of the GDP in Europe. So I mean, it's a critical mass which can make the difference.
Sorry, I just keep. Maybe there are questions. I don't know if you and we can open the floor for questions. I just wanted to make sure that before you leave, you are aware of this event on 2nd of October, so that we can have an aspect. We are covering different aspects. We are covering different cities to see also the city examples. There are cities that are more advanced than others when it comes to housing affordability, but certainly we cannot forget about the mortgage and aspects and financing aspects. Otherwise, it will really be, like a table missing a leg. No questions?
What?
There's one. Yeah, there's one.
Yeah, may I ask questions? I think we have a bit of time, so I will take it from where I left. There was a question in the chat earlier. So, in our advice to European Commission on green loans and green mortgages, we, for example, present the possibility of treating the green mortgages for like the capital expenditure, that it is being treated under the EU Green Bond Standard and taxonomy disclosures, for example. So that may not be taxonomy aligned in the short term, but within 5 years' time, or exceptionally within 10 years' time, that can be taxonomy aligned. I think this is a very important approach, brings flexibility and to achieve the objectives on the EU renovation way, for example. So that's why we also come up with certain very targeted advice on for the review of the mortgage credit directive. So, and against this background, I want to ask actually two questions. Number one, perhaps specifically for Christian, I think it's great to see from our point of view what is working. Usually we hear what is not working, and it is great to see there are things out there that are working. And so my simple question to you, what is the success rate? So you have targets there, and what was your achievement, first of all, in terms of what you achieved at the end? Did you meet your targets? How many of these borrowers took on your offers? And what was the incentive? What kind of incentives do you offer them for the uptake? This is my question number one. And number two, you said that the starting point is actually the transparency for the investor on covered bonds. So do you, actually, it may not be only for you, but in general to the audience here, do you think the market needs a further transparency or the intervention to increase the transparency on the underlyings for covered bonds when it comes to the underlying mortgages and so on? Do you think more transparency is needed on that?
Yep. On your first question, success rate, I think so far it's been relatively good. Of course, we start out by looking at the customers where we can see there is a big potential, but of course we also have to look at the credit quality of the customer. So we typically start out looking at customers to see, can they really afford to do this renovation? So of course we also have to handle our credit risk, but in general it's actually been taken very well by our customers, that the bank actually also try to help them to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings. So even for the clients that have not done any renovation, it's still been a positive experience for us as a bank, and it has actually improved our relationship with our client, that we are also not only offering financial products, but also helping them to do potential energy renovations. So even though I think the rate of actually succeeding in doing energy renovation could be higher, it also has some other positive effects for us as a bank. And on your other question on transparency, yes, I think we should have more transparency on ESG. I think there's been a lot of focus only on green assets, what is green, and I think especially for mortgage lending, where a lot of the mortgage lending is financed by covered bond, I think we need to look not only at the green assets but also on the rest of the loans, and we really need to look at how good are banks actually at improving the energy efficiency of the properties with a high energy consumption. So I think there is a need for more transparency, but again, it's when more transparency. If we need more transparency, then we also need more data. So we need data to be available for the financial institutions for them to provide this transparency. I hope this answers your question.
Is it still connected? Yeah. Yeah, Ali.
No, thank you for your answer, Christian.
Very good. Do we have any other questions? No, then maybe we can just proceed to the conclusions. We will have conclusions by our moderators. So I give the floor to you, Giampiero, and then followed by Luca.
Thank you, Paola. I think that the main topic, the next steps can be can imply two different activities. On the one hand, the dissemination of principles at level of each country in the 56 countries of UNECE region, but not only, since the principles have a global value and can contribute to achieving the SDGs. On the other hand, the implementation of principles at national level through specific targets harmonized with the country's regulatory framework and or soft law initiatives. Targets which can be at the same time application support and action plan. Thank you.
From my side, I would like to start with the last question from Ali on transparency. I think it's very important. I mean, we are as a federation trying to build a transparency template which should give this information. I think UNECE Bank has already completely given the harmonized disclosure template. What we want to achieve, our dream, is that every single bank doing green loans will provide this information for free for investors, not only on the green portfolio, but also as a proportion of the entire balance sheet. So this idea of the mortgage portfolio standard, which is, I think, nested in the Energy Performance Building Directive voted last week, will be there. So investors, they can see the strategy of the banks on how to improve their portfolio. As Christian said, I mean, our willingness to disclose, it depends on our legal capacity to disclose data and to have access to data, and the data should be meaningful for investors. For example, in Europe, the energy performance certification, in some countries, they include consumption. And in some others, they have only asset rated. So, I mean, it's very difficult to compare situations where you compare really pear and apples. And misleading investors can be a terrible mistake, because if there is a crisis, I mean, and investors are comparing wrong entities, it's a real problem. So we need the support of EBA, the European Banking Authority, the European Commission, the European institution, but especially the local authorities. We need, for example, institutions like ENEA or the government, that they should provide access for free to the banks, and also they should certify the quality of the data. Because using proxy is a good transition, but I mean, we know the limits of the proxy as well. We know that proxy sometimes cannot be comparable, and having access to data is important. So this is, I think, a priority for the entire financial sector. And I think EBA has already put the spotlight on this. The Parliament has already confirmed this, and we are ready to do the homeworks, but please put us in the conditions to deliver data and make disclosure like Fabio Massimo started today by saying that we need to disclose and make this comparable at a global level. And we are trying to put all these elements, starting from valuation, because the core of everything is valuation. And I think this is a good summary of our panel, and I wanted to thank all of you for the kind attention again and for the kind and insightful comments today.
Very good. Well, then, let me thank all for the moderators and all the participants and all the speakers. Sorry, is someone? Yeah, please. Thank you. Just to remind you that this webinar was recorded, and usually our webinars are always posted on our website because they really serve very much also as training material for students, but also experts that always use our web pages to gather information on the latest on housing, land management, and related topics. We will also make available your presentation, if you agree, on our website. So that is also information that is available to whoever wants to learn more about the subject. I thought it's important to tell you, because if you don't want to make it available, let us know. I think we have a good number of presentations, and we'll make sure to have them all. Last but not least, I'm repeating myself, 2nd of October, a housing affordability workshop. Your presence is very much welcome. You will find all the relevant information in due course on our website, but we will include all of you in our mailing list, so you will receive automatically information on our work. Yes, please. It's good. It's good. Anybody has anything before we close? Otherwise, we'll be happy to take also more questions or more comments. We had also two participants in the room that were not, so thank you for being here in person. Yeah, please. Yeah. Please. Maybe.
Yeah, thank you for invitation. It was a pleasure to spend this interesting session with you about affordability and housing. Me, myself, I represent myself. I'm Katerina Mirsdorf. I'm coming from Ukraine, from Kharkiv, and I see how much you invest your time to participate in this event. So for me, it's a very, very fruitful discussion today.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that. Very, very good. For those online that don't know, UNECE is involved in a project, also housing project, but it's more a reconstruction project in Ukraine involving the cities of Kharkiv and the city of Mykolaiv, for which we are advancing a lot of work on the economic recovery of the city, but also on the housing recovery and looking at many data, and also preparing an investment tracker, because eventually when investment will be possible, we'll be ready with a sort of platform where we will be able to see live what are the areas that require reconstruction, what projects are available, and how to invest in these projects. So I'm very happy that you're following our activities. Reggie?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps a final. I'm sorry to intervene after the conclusion, but yes, I'm sorry I couldn't attend the beginning of this seminar because I was in another meeting. I'm from the mission of France here in Geneva, and I really appreciate the high involvement of UNECE in, for instance, in Kharkiv, but also in your construction projects, but also in promoting concrete progress to all SDGs, and especially the sustainable cities. And in this respect, concerning housing and also and real estate, there is I acknowledge what you said, that it's a whole ecosystem. It's not only building, it's also thinking before living within these buildings, emitting less. It's all way of life. So I appreciate the way you are tackling the issue and remembering that. And I also know that you were, among others, Paola, you were in Paris 2 weeks ago, I think, for a big event on buildings. And there was, after this meeting in Paris, there was a Déclaration de Chaillot, where we also, well, all the participants agreed on some basic principles, and I hope little by little all these principles will be really involved and implemented. But we need for that, we need all actors, and especially well, people who are ready to invest, and that is the key message. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, a better conclusion than those, I don't know. So it's really perfect that we have the real sort of temperature of what we discussed from the room. And well, thank you very much for participating. I'll say goodbye together with the people in this room. Goodbye to all of you online, and see you at the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I suggest we take a picture for the social media posting. I have it here, the text. I wrote it, it's very simple, wrote that, so that we do maybe.
My office is asking for a picture of the meeting, so
Yeah,
I mean,
it's-
that's very timely because.
That maybe on the stairs outside. Yes. Usually that's a good place for.
Yeah, it's not representative for how many people were online.
So 40.
46. The topic.